Welcome to Attican Plays Railway Empire. All right, welcome to part 3 of our second look at the America map. In part 1, we did a rapid expansion all the way from Atlanta out to Odessa, Texas, and built up Odessa to be the largest city on the map. And then in part 2, we went into heavy city growth mode and we set up a couple of two-city clusters, Atlanta to Washington and New York to Portland, Maine, and got those going and started our city growth because that's our big thing in this one, building Odessa and then having 12 large cities, 90,000 plus cities. So we're going to start off this third part by cleaning up a couple of little shortcomings from the last one. I noticed the meat industry in New York, even though it's getting some cattle, and I'm looking around to see where in the world it's coming from. There's just no cattle. I also kind of noticed all that big map up there, so I'm just getting nosy looking to see if there's anything we can do with it. Then I realized later we can't even build up there. It's just to be pretty. That's Canada basically, but we can't really build in Canada. So I noticed that it doesn't have a direct connection for meat, for cattle into our meat industry in New York. So that's the first thing we're going to do here is rectify that problem. And what we're going to do, remember we bought out Doc Murphy, and some of this kind of random looking track here is hangover from his because we didn't liquidate. And that one station there you see on the bottom of the screen, the regular train station. Now that large one above it, we're using it, but the one below it is really just sitting there. So we're actually going to just end up turning it into a museum and a pass through, and we're going to run track through it in order to get our cattle to New York. So what we're going to do, because of this geography with the big rivers there and the costs of going over everything, what we're going to do is set up and take advantage of that line we built in episode 2 to run cotton up to Washington. We're going to hook into that line and have a little line that runs off of that. Right here we're setting up a merge where we're going to have a single track that runs off of this double track here. It's going to pass through Washington and go around and then go through where that other unused station is and allow us to run our cattle up to New York. So that's what's going on here. We're setting up switches there just above that bridge, and then at a single lane out there to the right that you see that goes through a platform that's not used in Washington and then hooks up with the line and moves on over to New York. So that's what's happening here, and that way we'll have a good supply of cattle going to New York. We'll make money shipping the cattle, of course, and we will make sure that New York and Portland are able to grow well because they'll have cattle coming into New York, and we'll have meat going to New York and Portland. And it's a bit of a mystery to me where New York was getting even any cattle at all because there's nothing close to it. This is the closest station, so I'm assuming overland is getting some cattle from this ranch that we're hooking up right here. But we're going to make that a lot better going forward. So this one, I guess the only interesting thing here is you had to be a little creative in how to get that over there. There are other ways I could have done this. Could have just run a line, right over the water, right over, straight to New York without messing with Washington at all, or just barely going around Washington. But the geography in this area is kind of challenging because of the mountains and all the water. So this seemed like the best approach, and it certainly worked. So that's the one I went with. And now I'm struggling to get that sharp curve and that bridge to reconcile with one another. That can be one of the bigger challenges of building your track. So what we're going to have to do is figure out a way to both negotiate that sharp turn and add onto that bridge. So what I ended up doing there, you notice it worked if I did a connection. So if I ran the line through and just connected it off, but I don't really want it to connect. I want it to be a separate line. So I'm going to give it one more try and run it backwards this time. And then slowly tweak it to go out away so that that bridge doesn't mess me up. And just gradually move it back to get it as straight as I can get it and still have it work. And it's very sensitive, and I ended up right there. That's good enough. Finally said, okay, that's good enough. It works. So we'll double track, and it's interesting. This is a large station that we're not using. I could have just deleted the station, obviously, and just run track, but I thought, we'll leave it. Like I said, eventually it'll be a train museum, and people can go out there and enjoy looking at all of the trains from what used to be the Great Attica Enterprises railway system that probably falls into disarray and goes bankrupt at some point. Now, because we have that station in the middle, we have to set our signals with the directional signals, the stop signs, on both sides of the station in order to get the traffic flow to be the way we want it. So now we've got that set. We'll set up our interim signals, and we are ready to run cattle, or close to ready to run cattle into New York. And we want to, anytime you do these, you want to make sure that you have space to get your new line that's merging with another line. You want to make sure those trains can get out of the way. So I call this the Jan Jansen technique. I think he's the one who told us about this tip. When these trains are coming back to like that cattle ranch, they're always empty, so they're very short. So you can put your signals up very close to one another and let them stack up and get them off the main line and out of the way so that our cotton line can keep running without having those trains holding it up. So now we've got, now we're getting cattle going into New York, and that'll help that whole cluster up there, that two-city cluster of New York and Portland, grow well. And while I'm thinking of it, the one other thing I should have done, we really should have run a line between Washington and New York, because there would have been a lot of profit to be made there. Of course, now money, this is at a point for me where the game kind of becomes a little meh. All these games, once I've got it figured out, that once we've cracked the code, so to speak, and gotten through the main strategy parts, they get a little boring to me. And this one, once you start making money, see, we've got $7.5 million, and I'm trying to build stuff as fast as I can. We just can't spend it that fast anymore. We're at that point where we just can't spend the money as fast as we make it, and some people really love that, and it is cool to see, oh, my company's worth $500 million or whatever. But honestly, for me, it gets a little boring at this point, because now I'm just building and building and building and building, and it just becomes one of those more kind of deals. But anyway, you notice there I also fixed. I said we were going to fix a couple things. That's the other thing. I'd forgotten a supply tower on one of the lines, so I put that in, and that'll fix a lot of that problems. You have to kind of watch these you get these little yellow triangles that are kind of warnings about your trains, and they'll pop up all around the bottom and sides of your screen. And a lot of them are loading problems, and that doesn't mean anything. That just means you've got a train maybe at a say at a log camp, and you don't really need logs right now, so it's just sitting there waiting until you have a need for the logs again. That just means you've got, you're covered. That's actually, to me, that's a good thing, as long as you don't have 12 trains lined up waiting, which would be wasteful. But I'd much rather have an extra train waiting than not have enough trains. I've said that before on other videos. But back to those little triangles. But the ones you do have to watch out for are are the ones where it says missing resources. Now the breakdowns we don't care about because they'll get fixed. The random breakdowns we certainly don't care about because there's nothing you can do about them. They're just going to happen once in a while. The breakdown for bad condition is really a sign that says we probably need to have maintenance. But remember, the technique we're using, if you remember from another video, is we're actually updating our trains, and because of the way the research works on this map, we're going to replace all the trains in large groups and upgrade and move to faster and better trains. Every time you do that, you got a new set of trains, so we're not actually setting maintenance anywhere. The only maintenance we have anywhere on this map is where we bought Doc Murphy, and he had stations that had maintenance on them. He was a better owner than we were because he actually maintained his trains. We do not. We just run them to death. So now we've gone out and doing our third two-city cluster. This is between Chicago and Toledo, and reason being we picked this one is that Toledo, it was the headquarters for Doc Murphy, so he has done some growing there already for us. Now, he didn't do a great job, but he did grow it some, so Toledo's off to a decent start. So we'll take Toledo and Chicago. They're also beer meat, of course, and we will build those two, and that'll give us a really nice, fairly close together two-city cluster. And we'll set up the same thing, and this is the same exact thing we do every time for this technique, which is put that warehouse in the middle, set up our lines, run all our resources into it. And the biggest thing you have to figure out is, where do I want the lines? So we're running the lines through the middle two platforms of the warehouse because I wanted room. In this case, it looked like we were going to get resources from both the north and the south of that warehouse. So I used the middle two for my pass-through city to city and saved one line on the top and the bottom, so to speak, to allow for bringing resources in. Now I'm cleaning up his lines that they're just kind of a mess. And notice all those refunds I got. That's the thing I mentioned on the other one that I just learned, that you can not liquidate and then later on decide I don't want that track and get a refund for it. So that's a pretty good deal. Now here we've got this is probably worth talking about. We've got a regular train station, and it's covering two goods. It's covering both the logs and the wheat up there to the north. So the technique I like to use on these is we're going to run double line out of the train station, and it's going to hook into our single point down in the warehouse. But then we put switches in so that we can use both platforms. So we have these crossover switches, so now we can use both of the platforms. And then the technique we'll use is we will set up a line from platform 1 that prioritizes one of the two goods and runs to the warehouse. And then we'll set up a line from platform 2 that prioritizes the other resource running to the warehouse. And now, regardless of which one's available or which one we need, the trains will fill up and run, but we'll make sure that we're getting both logs and wheat. So here's platform 1, priority logs running to the warehouse. So we set that one up, it's ready to go. Now we'll set up another line on platform 2, priority wheat. There we go. And the combination, obviously, of platforms and resources, irrelevant. Doesn't matter which way you go with them, and as long as you have them unique. So this one I'm actually double checking to make sure I did prioritize the logs, and I did. So now the way you want to and obviously to make this work, we of course have to activate the warehouse goods so that the warehouse is actually receiving the goods that we're trying to ship. So that's what we're doing right here. But back to that idea of the using the double train station like that. The other thing we have to do is be careful how we copy them, so that we're not just copying one or the other. Like, always, if we make too many copies of the log priority and not enough of the wheat, for example, we might tend to run more logs than wheat and end up with a wheat shortage. So if you notice there, I'm bouncing between them doing my copies and kind of keeping track of how many do I want to run for each one. So now we're going to add milk into the mix and just merge it with the existing line we have and run it into the warehouse. And this is just like every other one you've seen. This is the technique we'll use. Make sure we have an exit lane so that we can get the milk train off the main line, so the logs and wheat can continue to run. And then we'll just keep using that technique and go on and on. And there is one thing, probably, I was going to fast forward at this point, but there is something coming up that's probably worth a quick mention. One of these days I'll just do a Let's Play. I don't really do Let's Plays. I always try to do things that are, that are kind of instructional, that show you something worth learning. That shows you something interesting, and it would be a whole lot easier on me if I just played. And I can talk about what I'm doing, but if I just played, so I may think about that. So I would be interested in what y'all think about that if I just played these games a little bit, and I guess still would talk about what I'm doing, but I wouldn't work myself so hard trying to come up with interesting little things to show you. And they would still come up, of course, but my life would be a lot easier if I just played these games and talked about them, I can tell you. So rather than trying to edit these things up and fast forward them through the boring parts and all that stuff, if I just played, and maybe I think a lot of people like that, but I don't know. Let me know what you think. I would be interested in hearing what you guys think about that. If you think it would still be as good a channel if I did Let's Play and covered concept, and I could still do my specialty, the warehouse series or whatever occasionally when something comes up, but basically just play these scenarios. Let me know. So here's the one I was talking about that is kind of interesting. The fruit, the big thing about these warehouses is you need to load balance the throughput, how you're going to run your resources in there, because if you run everything through the same side. So the easiest thing obviously with that fruit would be to go to the north of Chicago, between Chicago and the lake, and come in on the north of that warehouse. However, we've already got 3 things going into the north. So I decided that it would be worthwhile to loop around Chicago and come in from the south with the fruit so that it's not competing with the logs and the wheat and the milk. And we can then use this line that's coming in here. There's going to be some veggies off to the west there that we can grab and link into this line and run them into the bottom. So we just have to deal with this little curve here that's a bit too much. I really made it as kind of that curve was too much to start with, so we had to move it off, move the second line off a little bit just to make it all work. But it's all good. It works just fine. And these lines where you're running the into the warehouse, typically, don't stress yourself too much trying to, I got to make it perfectly straight and as efficient as possible. No, you don't. Just make it work and make it get down there. And because you can run 1 train, you can run 2 trains, you can run whatever, and it's all good in terms of loading up that warehouse. And again, I'll repeat myself, something I've said earlier. You want to load the warehouse before you start running, before you worry about setting up the line that runs between Chicago and Toledo. Because that Chicago-Toledo line, it'll still make you some money if you started it first, but you're better off getting your warehouse loaded up with goods first, or at least started in that direction before you run the trains between the cities, and that way you maximize the profit that those trains are making for you. And you're spending your money in the right direction. Now, as you can see, I'm building as fast as I know how, and I cannot keep up with the money. I mean, it's just it's too good. Our income's too good. That's a great problem to have. And now I'm noticing that Chicago doesn't have a direct feed of cattle, so we're going to fix that problem. And this is a hangover station that Doc Murphy left us when we bought him out. And we're going to take advantage of it and run cattle into Chicago. And I have at this point, when I start making more money than I can spend, this is the point where I stop worrying about, oh, that's too big a bridge. I could save $10,000 if I did X. I just sort of build them and go. I mentioned that in the other video. I do get a little sloppy, I have to admit, a little sloppy and lazy. Again, when I hit that point where we're making more money than we know what to do with, it's just sort of, to me, we've figured the game out at this point. We've met our challenge. It's just a matter of doing it. And the doing it part's a little boring for me. It's the figuring it out that I like. So we're just going to run a short little line here, double track down to that bridge. There's no reason to try to go over the bridge. And plus, we don't have enough space in Chicago to, on the other side of the bridge to merge. So we'll just run it this way. And it's fine. It's going to be a short cattle line anyway, so it's going to work out just great. And now Chicago can get cattle, and Chicago and Toledo can get meat. And that two-city cluster should work great. The other thing we'll need is wheat going to Toledo, because that's the beer side of this little beer meat line. I'm still thinking about the warehouse and loading it up, and here's where I was mentioning that we could take that as veggies and merge them into the that fruit line we have going to the warehouse. And I almost got out of my own process here. Remember our process for doing these mergers. You come up to the line you want to merge with, you kind of bump into it, you scoot over to the first lane, you accept, and you go right above that, move up and scoot over to the second lane, accept that, then you do your other line coming in. And so this is the, quote, other line coming in right here. And now we've got a proper merger that's going to work well once we get our signals set. So we set our signals on both ends, run this one down as far as it'll go to queue up to wait its turn to get on the main line, and make sure that our directional signals on the line we just merged with are still working correctly, and everything is going right in both directions the way we want it, and we're looking good. Now we've got a good clean merger, and our veggies can go into our warehouse. And one thing I would say, if an improvement I've made in my own gameplay, it goes back to discussions we've had on multiple videos about how hard it is to manage the throughput at the warehouse. And one of the things I've learned is don't run so many trains. Just run less trains from these things like a veggie line, Toledo and Chicago, even when they get fairly large, are not going to consume vegetables at that great a rate. So we don't need 5 trains running veggies in there to try to fill up that warehouse. In fact, that's counterproductive because those 5 veggie trains are now keeping the ones we really do need, like wheat. You need a lot of wheat because of the beer, and both cities need the wheat. And all those 5 veggie trains are just queuing up and kind of gumming up the works. So veggies and fruit and milk, even unless you have a dairy industry, are lower volume. So you don't need so many trains. So I'm trying to teach myself to not get train happy. I still like to run a lot of trains, and I always will, I suspect. But I am getting better about holding off on that. So it's a lesson learned for all of us, maybe. So now it's time to set up our city-to-city line. We've got goods rolling in there, and we're going to use that same technique: left, 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 right, right, left, right, right, to set up our lines, and now we'll be able to feed Toledo and Chicago. And you'll notice, too, one thing I don't have, and I could add if I really cared about the money or if I needed passenger and mail profit as a goal somewhere or something like that, I would have a second line that runs between Chicago and Toledo dedicated to passengers and mail. Because as these two grow, there's going to be a lot of good passenger and mail traffic. And we're kind of missing out on it with this approach. We're just looking at the freight. Now, the freight's your best money maker. It is. You'd absolutely make more money on freight in this game than you do any other way. But there's a lot of passenger and mail money to be made. And a second line would be easy enough to set up between the two, run it kind of parallel. But don't mix it with your freight line, because that'll mess up your city growth. If you have, like these lines here need to be freight only. If they are automatic, they're going to mess up. The passengers and mail are going to take the slots away from our freight, and we're not going to move enough freight between these two cities to help to keep them growing. So we need freight only lines running city to city. And then if we want to get the passenger mail, as I said, we build a redundant line, a second line. It's not really redundant, another line to handle that. All right, so that gives us, we've got Atlanta to Washington, we've got New York to Portland, now we've got Chicago to Toledo, so we've got 246 plus Odessa. So that should give us 7 cities that are going to grow very nicely at this point. Okay, so at this point, I'm starting to get a little irritated by these guys stealing my people. So I just said, all right, that's it. I'm going to buy you. So I buy out Roger. And I want you to notice how easy it is to buy these competitors if you've done a solid job with your building. If you've done a solid job with your building, your economy at a point gets so strong that you really don't have competitors. They are just, they're just like afterthoughts. And the one place where I think there's an exception to that is that 1890s West Coast scenario that's pretty difficult. And the reason that one is so difficult is your competitors start 2 and 3 times bigger than you are. So you're at $1 million and they're already at $3 million. So they're strong to start. So you really got to hustle to catch up. But again, it's the same thing. If you do a great job of building, you can catch up with them, pass them, and start buying them out. But in a case like this, where we start on pretty even footing, it's no problem at all. And I did see that, and according to the development roadmap, they're going to do an upgrade to the AI. So I'm hoping they'll make them a little tougher, make them so we can set them to be really tough or whatever. And now, right now, I'm doing a little dance of the employees because when you buy somebody out, you get all these employees. So the other thing I did here, one of the reasons I bought Roger out, there were 2. I was annoyed and wanted to get rid of him. And 2, when you set up a 2-city cluster, you got this beautiful high profit lines that you're setting up. Well, this is a great opportunity to put staff on them, but you can't get staff fast enough. However, if you time it so that you buy a competitor at the same time you are, just after you've set up these lines, now I can go out and get all these beautiful conductors and engineers. Well, I don't want conductors. You see, I'm buying the conductors. I'm going to use them on other lines, but I don't want to use them on my pass-through line. So I'm just making sure I don't lose them. I'm going to go ahead and hire them all and just hold them and make them unassigned. And I'm double checking to make sure, see if there's a better upgrade for my chief engineer. And I decide there isn't, but there is a surveyor. I absolutely looking at that to see if that's better. And I like this guy better because he helps you with your route rather than tunnels. And I don't build a lot of tunnels, so he's beautiful. And I would say anytime you can get a market crier, go for it, because that helps you with your either your passenger or your mail revenue. So that was our economy just took another big leap forward right there, because we picked up, it was worth spending the money to buy Roger to get all his employees, because now the Chicago to Toledo line, we just packed it up with engineers, stokers, and security guards. So they're going to be very little maintenance on those lines. They're going to run fast. They're going to get $800 bonuses on each end because of the security guards, because we're running full trains. So our economy was already strong, just took another big giant leap forward by that combination of buying out a competitor and assigning all his staff to really good profitable lines. So now we're looking to see where do we want to go next, because we need more cities to grow. So we're going to pick this one down here. We've got a nice little beer meet in Nashville to Memphis. So we're going to set up a line from Nashville, which is already in our network, to Memphis, which we're adding to our network. We'll put the warehouse between them and do the same thing. So it's sort of, again, kind of rinse and repeat. And I am going to fast forward through this one. There's not a lot of interesting stuff that happens here. The one thing I will tell you is that eventually we end up with a wood-based industry in Memphis, and we're not getting enough logs through our pass-through warehouse, so I actually divert logs into direct feed, much like you would do with the wheat and cattle. Send the logs directly to the consumer, in this case a sawmill. And that's actually, by the way, something you can think about for as you get more into these pass-through warehouses and your cities get a little bigger. You can think about running direct lines to any city that has a direct need for a product. So, for example, if I have it's not just beer and meat. If I have a sawmill and it needs logs, it would be a good idea if you can do it to run logs directly to that city, in addition to the logs you're sending to the warehouse, so that the other city can grow, because the consumption of logs is so great that if you can fulfill it through a direct line, that takes the pressure off of your city's city line, and now it's not going to be filled up with logs, and it will bring that city other goods, other resources that it needs from the warehouse. So that's the one thing we did here eventually, was after these grow and we get a logging business in Memphis, we do run some logs directly. We keep running logs to the warehouse, but we also run a couple of trains of logs directly into Memphis, so that that sawmill is nicely filled up with resources and can make a lot of profit. So that's about the only interesting thing that happened there. So this is like, again, we're in rinse and repeat mode. So let's fast forward a little bit. So now we're moving right along here. What you're seeing is the build out of that Memphis to Nashville two-city cluster with the pass-through warehouse. And here I'm setting up lines to go in so I can feed some stuff directly into Memphis, as I mentioned earlier. And the the thing we're really in here, right, once we get past this, we'll just be in kind of a monitoring because remember, you do have to kind of watch your clusters, make sure the industries work out correctly, and hopefully, if you're really into it, and you were a better player than I am, you would be watching each of these cities grow, and then hit them when they hit that 40 mark. You would be putting that industry in there. When they hit that 60 mark, you would be putting that industry in there, and especially importantly, putting in that museum. So to keep that growth going, that's another phase that kind of happens here as you start putting the museum in. And here here's an example where we're putting cotton, running cotton up to a textile industry that has now opened up. And right after this, we're going back on regular speed here, not because this is so fascinating, but because of what's about to come up, which is, I would call it semi-fascinating. All right, so here we're running up to Toledo. Toledo now has a textile industry, so we want to make sure it has cotton. So you're kind of monitoring your cities and watching those industries. As I said, ideally putting them in yourself. If not, that's fine. The computer will typically do a good job. If they don't, you buy it, you demolish it, and you put something in that is good. But in this case, we've got a textile industry up there in Toledo, and we're going to make sure that it has cotton because we don't want it to be a hindrance to our growth. We want it to contribute to our growth. And if we feed it cotton, it contributes. If we don't, it hinders. It's that simple. So we're down to one competitor at this point. And by the way, we're up to running Philadelphia's now. So we're running Philadelphia's. And I just see where Gerald Johnson just outbid us for foreign workers. And that kind of irritated me. So don't ask me why, but that bugged me. So I said, forget this. So I'd figure out how much money do I need to buy this guy out. We're going to go out here and issue a bond. Now we got plenty of money. Just took one bond to do it, and bye-bye General. So we're going to buy out the General, and we're going to merge with him. And in this case, we are going to liquidate, take the cash, and just say goodbye. So now all of our competitors are gone. And I just wanted to show you this to illustrate how if you are really getting on top of your build and having these good, strong clusters that are growing your cities and having a really strong economy, then the competitors are not competitors. They're just something for you to buy. And now that we bought him, we've got this Memphis to Nashville warehouse that we've just set up, and you know what? Maybe in hindsight, I was being a little flip about that. He pissed me off comment. We really had just, again, that technique I talked about. We built this Memphis to Nashville warehouse, so now we can staff it with some really good folks and make it just extra strong. So again, build your two-city cluster, buy out an opponent, use their staff to staff your new city-to-city lines, and now you've got really strong, really high-profit lines that are just going to make you ridiculous amounts of money, and you get rid of an irritating competitor. And you notice there where I had that mismatch, the other beauty of getting all these guys lined up is now because I have so many options. See here, that didn't like that guard, so I just grab another guard that's available. I've got all these people to choose from, and I can go out and staff these guys. The other thing is pay attention to the names of your lines. So where it says more farm to warehouse, we really don't want anything on that. Now where we've got city to city, that's cool. We can run, when you've got a city to city like that, Nashville to Atlanta, you can actually run all four types. You can staff it up fully because you're going to run a combination of passengers and mail and freight. So these are good ones to put everybody on if you want to. There again, we got a mismatch, so we just grab another guy. It's nice to have that abundance. And it's kind of nice to do your staffing. It's a pain, but it's nice to do your staffing in a big group like this Now we're down to just a bunch well, we got some security guards, and we put them. Now, oh, that's the other one. The other one about the name, where it says like city to warehouse. Those would be your city-to-city pass-throughs. They're great ones to have security guards on because they get paid on either end. In fact, they're great ones to have engineers, stokers, and security guards on. But obviously, you don't want conductors because they're freight-only lines, and the conductors are laced. But again, I've got all these conductors now I want to use, and I want to make sure I get like city to city, Odessa to El Paso, city to city, so the conductor will help me there. So I'm just going to go out and assign all my conductors to my city to city lines, the ones I have kind of stragglers here that I haven't assigned elsewhere. And that way I've made the best possible use out of all these. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's not the best possible use. If I wanted to be really anal about this, I would go through and think about what's my most profitable line, and make sure all my security guards are on my short, cattle lines running directly to a city and stuff like that. But this is as close as I'm going to come because it's just way too much work to go to all that trouble. But this gives me really strong, solid. Well, people don't like this guy. There we go. There we go. Man, we got a good match. Okay, so you can see we got lots of employees here. But, and even though this is a bit of a pain to go through all this, it just makes every line that gets one of these employees is a much better line. And now I'm trying to find another good line to put a conductor on. There we go, Washington to Pittsburgh, that'll work. It's a job to find homes for all these people. Now we'll look to see if we got any office staff that are worth having. Like that accountant. Always want to have an accountant. They're great. And we're kind of done. So I mentioned how you want to kind of keep monitoring your cities. So, and you're also looking for your own mistakes. Like here, I didn't have enough a supply tower. I missed a supply tower. I just kind of get, I don't know, sloppy, and shame on me. But you just want to keep looking for those triangles and looking to see if you get like missing supplies or something like that. You want to fix it, of course. Breakdowns you don't mind. They just happen, particularly the random ones, like I said before. But what I wanted to show you here is you want to keep monitoring both those triangles, but you also want to monitor your cities because we're starting to see right here, we've got the opportunity to put a museum in. So that's kind of your next thing. You set up your two-city cluster, your pass-through warehouse, get it all loaded, get everything running. Make sure you monitor and get the right industries in there. And the other thing you want to do is get your museum. And you notice New York and Portland both hit kind of at the same time, and they'll tend to do that. So now that's reminding me to go back, and I see I have an opportunity in Washington to put in a museum, and that's going to make me say, oh, what about Atlanta? I wonder if it's big enough yet. And look at that, sure enough it is. So Atlanta and Washington have probably hit before Portland and New York, but So I probably could have done this even sooner had I been more diligent. So go to Toledo. Look at this, Toledo. Now Toledo, obviously we built that Toledo, Chicago quite a bit later. And it also needs it. So it tells me a couple things. One, I'm a little slow getting this done. But two, look at this. We've got, here's 6 cities that have all hit 60,000 pretty quickly from the time that we set up their pass-through warehouses. It just shows you that a basic setup with a pass-through warehouse of a 2-city cluster will get you, honestly, it'll get you to 90,000. Because remember, your levels are 20, that's where you can first start expanding your businesses. Then 40, that's where you can put in your second business. And then the next one is 60 to put in your warehouse, or sorry, your specialty building like attraction or museum. In our case, we want museums for city growth. And then your next plateau is the 90, which is what we're trying to get to. So once we have 2 good industries in each of the 2 cities that are complementing one another, and we're making sure that they're getting their goods, then you are in great shape to get all the way to 90,000. So 90,000 is really, with a 2-city cluster approach, is a great target. You know you can hit it. So now we're moving to the Red Dragon, which is, honestly, it's my favorite locomotive. So we're going to upgrade everybody to Red Dragons. So now we've got Red Dragons running everywhere. And by the way, now we've got all new locomotives everywhere, so maintenance is not an issue. And this is, by the way, I mentioned this earlier, but this is where I'm noticing the log shortage in Memphis. And I want to do something about that. So you can see Memphis growth is really, really good. There we go. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm ahead of myself. Here comes the sawmill that I mentioned. So I was diligent enough to actually catch it and build my own sawmill here. We'll bump it up to level 2, which seems to be the magic level for a 2-city cluster, 2 or 3. And then later on, we're going to notice that it's not quite getting enough logs and deal with the problem there. So we got some new applicants, want to make sure we take care of those, and we're just playing. So now look at this. We finished everything except our city growth. We've got 2 cities that have grown far enough, and we finished everything else. Now, why did we finish them all? Because they were things like hook up so many rural businesses to your network and transport so much corn. Well, all these things are just naturally going to occur if you have made a good build, had a good plan that you've executed, and had the rapid expansion and the city growth and everything the way we've done it. All these things are just naturally going to occur. We didn't have to do anything special to get the corn. We didn't do anything special to hook up all these rural stations. We just kept growing and kept doing what we would naturally do to set up our warehousing, and that has we've just sort of automatically achieved all those tasks. Now, does that mean you just shut your eyes and build and not pay attention to your tasks? Absolutely not. You absolutely want to watch your tasks and have your strategy match your task. But the point is, if you have a good method that you're following for how you do the build, a lot of those tasks are just going to naturally occur. You almost can't help it. You will have to do those if you're doing a good build. So let's just review where we are. We've got Odessa is huge. It's over 120. It's probably like 150,000 now. We have Atlanta and Washington have passed 60. New York and Portland passed 60. Chicago and Toledo are past 60. So that's 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 cities. Then we've got Memphis and Nashville are both in great shape and growing rapidly. So that's going to be 11, and we need a 12th city, and we'll figure out how we're going to do that in our next episode. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it'll help you become a better player, and I hope you'll join us for our next Railway Empire video. Thank you.